Let's be real here. Deep down, everyone knows that Farfetch'd is cool as
That's the coolest Pokemon ever!
It's undeniable. My Farfetch'd doesn't care what he's doing or who he's going up against, he's going to get a crit and he's going to win. Steel-type Pokemon? Absolutely wrecked. Electric Gym Leader Watson demolished all 3 of his Pokemon solo and it only took me like 12 tries. He's getting same type attack bonus, aka stab, with his moves like aerial ace and slash, and it turns out stab is all he knows. Stab, 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 stab. The aptly named The Legend was crowned the undeniable king of cool the other day in his first ever Pokemon contest, and I mean, look how stupid this Tallow looks trying to copy my boy's moves in comparison. You will never be him, Tallow, give up. Okay, I'm calm. But despite how ridiculously sick my favorite little unibrowed boy is, there are a lot of people that aren't privy to the little guy's history. While he no doubt belongs to the School of Cool, Farfetch'd also belongs to a group I refer to as tragic Pokemon. You know, Pokemon like Cubone, who mourns its mother in the saddest way imaginable. Mewtwo, a Pokemon who questions if it even has a purpose considering it was synthesized to become the perfect weapon. Or perhaps a more modern example like Mimikyu, destined to forever be in the shadow of the franchise's most electrifying mascot. There are many Pokemon with tragic backstories that have been discussed at length. But considering that even in Generation 1 alone, Farfetch'd is probably not the first duck Pokemon you think of when someone says the phrase duck Pokemon. I mean, even in his debut episode in the anime, he had to share a lot of screen time with Psyduck. This sassy little leek-wielding waddler is often left out of many conversations. Today, I'm going to explain why we should talk about this apostrophed avian more, and I'm going to give him his long since overdue flowers. He has had a rough climb to get to where he is today, but luckily Game Freak and the Pokemon Company have thrown him a few bones, or sticks rather, and I want to highlight that if no one else will. This is the fall and the rise of Farfetch'd.
Humble Mud.
I'll cut to the chase on why I feel like this brave bird is a tragic Pokemon. Now, I thought this was a bit of a niche fact, but after scientifically surveying a handful of friends and coworkers, pretty much everyone seemed to be aware that Farfetch'd is known for being quite tasty. In fact, Farfetch'd is considered a delicacy by humans so enjoyable to consume that its numbers have dwindled down to near extinction. This seems to be a fact known by a lot of people around my age especially, presumably because of this scene within the 46th episode from the first season of the anime where the Pokédex tells you exactly what I just said.
Farfetch'd, a wild duck Pokemon. Farfetch'd makes a delicious meal, especially when cooked with leek. Because of this, Farfetch'd is nearly extinct.
Its rarity then becomes Ash's main focus and drive for wanting to catch one, but no one really comments on the fact that it's been eaten to near non-existence. In fact, this episode often plays the Pokemon's unfortunate relegation to a meal for laughs a majority of the time.
It tastes good and has good taste.
He's done all the work for us!
Too bad he didn't leave his recipe for Farfetch'd flambe.
The design of Farfetch'd itself seems to be influenced by a popular Japanese proverb saying that a duck comes bearing spring onions. This would be a sight to behold because a duck carrying its own onions would be its own meal and a rare Farfetch'd thing to see.
What amazing luck! We come to look for it, and it comes to us!
And the saying itself refers to when you have a stroke of luck and things begin to become more and more convenient after the fact. So the entire intention behind this little bird's design and the one fact that the anime chose to share was that Farfetch'd is tasty and hard to find. But I'm sure you might be thinking, Humble, this is just the anime, maybe it's not canon, right? Well, I read on Bulbapedia that the illustrated book of Pocket Monsters also confirms that Farfetch'd were consumed by humans, so I obtained a PDF of said book, found the section featuring Farfetch'd as well as Doduo and Dodrio on page 41, grabbed the blurb about the Pokemon, and Google translated it from its original Japanese. In that book, it actually goes on to say, information that Farfetch'd and the stock taste good when cooked together was spread nationwide by the media several years ago, and the number of Farfetch'd plummeted. This completely shocked me, as I was under the impression that Farfetch'd were hunted during an earlier time in humanity's existence. I didn't realize that this Pokemon was actively being hunted in recent times. And while the games never explicitly confirm that this Pokemon is a popular trophy for hunters, as early as Pokemon Yellow we can read that the Pokédex confirms Farfetch'd are rarely seen, and so it's thought that their numbers are decreasing. This also helps explain why the only way you can obtain a Farfetch'd in the original games is via trade. They are that rare. By the time the events of Crystal roll around, which is canonically after Red, Blue, and Yellow, people seem to become more educated on the plight of the Farfetch'd population, as the Dex entry explicitly states that more people have made an effort to breed these Pokemon in order to prevent their extinction. So why do I care about this? Why am I talking about all of this? Well, staying on the subject of Crystal for a second, one of the most memorable portions of that game that I can remember is when you infiltrate the underground Team Rocket hideout inside Slowpoke Well, where you discover that Team Rocket was severing the tails of Slowpoke and selling them as delicacies. This is such a big plot point in Gen 2. I personally remember it as being such a vile and dark thing to see in a Pokemon game, contrasting pretty hard against its usual themes of the bond between humans and animals and the power of friendship and all of that. And it is a vile, dark thing to see in a franchise for children, but you have to remember Slowpoke can grow back their tails, and they aren't being killed in this process. Not to compare one tragedy to another or make light of what Slowpoke went through, but to be fair, they're known to be forgetful, and according to Dex entries, having its tail bitten doesn't register any sort of pain, which by the way is how a Slowbro comes to be, so how can we even be sure that these Slowpoke were aware of what was happening to them? It's just interesting to me that Farfetch'd are literally being wiped out, and it's sort of just a thing that happens, and you can read about it in the periphery of Pokemon lore, and that's really it. Meanwhile, this Slowpoke story is right in the forefront of your Gold and Silver experience and is arguably not as bad as what Farfetch'd face on a daily basis. As I said earlier, if you can find a Farfetch'd and get a Dex entry on it, you'll discover that there are apparently breeders out there working to build back the population, but you never actually see that taking place. In fact, the only Farfetch'd you meet in the overworld of Gen 2 is the one around Azalea Town and Ilex Forest. I think this situation surrounding Farfetch'd just draws a lot of interesting parallels to our own views of animals in real life. For a majority of people, certain animals are afforded the luxury of being seen as pets, while others aren't quite as lucky. Now, I myself live in an area where duck hunting in real life is most certainly a thing, and I'll admit I eat meat as well. I'm not trying to preach any particular message here. I just think this whole thing is interesting because when you look at all of the Pokemon who have been victimized in the past, it's never played for laughs. Lapras is another Pokemon well known to be driven to near extinction due to excessive poaching. This is a fact shared throughout a majority of the Pokédex entries that you'll see for this Pokemon across all of the games. And thankfully, in Sun and Moon, it's confirmed that protective regulations installed by the government have caused Lapras populations to explode, so much so in fact that they're considered overpopulated now. Ultra Moon even goes on to state that the reason for these protective measures is due to Lapras being, quote, so cherished by humanity as time has gone on. Farfetch'd, however, was never given the same grace and attention. Pokemon like Basculin and Sharpedo have been popular sources of sustenance in the past, but evidently are no longer. Thus, you might think that Farfetch'd belongs in the same category as Pokemon like Toedscruel, Barraskewda, and Wishiwashi as Pokemon commonly eaten by humans. However, Farfetch'd's situation is actually pretty unique because there's no evidence to suggest that these aquatic Pokemon face the same level of endangerment that Farfetch'd does. In fact, it's pretty well documented that Wishiwashi in particular are quite abundant, considering that they are eaten by Wailmer and Wailord in large volumes every single day. And again, to make another comparison to Lapras, as I mentioned earlier, almost all of Lapras's Pokédex entries have been about its population-related issues. Well, Pokemon entries for Farfetch'd are a little different. The Pokédex entries stopped including the tidbit about its population issues as early as Gen 3, which at first might make you think that maybe their populations have gone back to normal, but Farfetch'd is still notoriously hard to find in pretty much all of the games, and in the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee games, its Dex entries weren't retconned or anything, and I think if there was ever an opportunity to do that, it would have been in those games. Instead, the Dex entries from Gens 3 through 6 focus more on the little Littlemon's hyper-obsession for sticks and stalks, which is admittedly adorable, and may paint that funny picture of the proud but silly baton-spinning Pokemon you think of if you grew up with the anime, but to me, now that I've been thinking about all of this, I see something different when I read these lines. Perhaps the reason Farfetch'd are so protective of their leeks, strive to find the best stock that they can, and even fight amongst themselves to get the best one that they can, maybe that's because they feel like they need it for extra protection. Not only are there surely some natural predators out there, but they've also been disproportionately targeted by humans. They need something else to help give them that edge, and the game itself corroborates this considering that Farfetch'd's critical hit ratio is drastically increased if it's wielding a stick. Suddenly, the Gen 4 entry stating that it, quote, can't live without the stock that it holds, starts to feel less like an intentionally exaggerated expression for humor and more like a dark reality that these little guys face. The stick really could be the difference between life or death for these little guys, but there is a glimmer of hope. For years, for generations, Farfetch'd have been at the bottom rung of the Pokemon ladder, but when we were introduced to the region of Galar through Sword and Shield, we got to see an alternate reality that our Cantonian Farfetch'd could have possibly experienced had life been a little easier for it. While they can still sometimes be hard to find, Galarian Farfetch'd are not explicitly rare in the same way that the Farfetch'd of previous generations have been. They grew up around thicker reeds, and so they had to adapt if they wanted to wield the leeks that grow there. Instead of the on-the-run foraging lifestyle that the Farfetch'd of Kanto live, trying to build nests away from predators, the Farfetch'd that hail from Galar are proud and formidable warriors who enjoy a good battle. Galarian Farfetch'd thrive, and that's only further exhibited by the fact that they can evolve into sirfetch'd. This gallant, steadfast, hardy, and regal knight of a Pokemon adorns both a leafy shield and a sharpened stalk lance, and it is everything in an evolution that a Day 1 Farfetch'd fan like myself hoped to see one day. Calm, collected, and with plenty of battle experience, Sirfetch'd is not afraid of its foes. It is the physical actualization of the spirit that I know is inside of my perfect hacked Farfetch'd the Legend that I'm currently rolling through Omega Ruby with solo. Sirfetch'd has its own signature move, Meteor Assault, which is the strongest regular fighting type move in all of Pokemon, matched in power only by Focus Punch. And seeing Sirfetch'd do his thing can't help but make you think that if regular Farfetch'd weren't hunted the way that they were, maybe they would have also gotten their own evolution. In fact, there is the Pokemon Madam who was supposed to be introduced as its evolution in Gen 2, but unfortunately that never happened. Regardless, what we see with Galarian Farfetch'd and Sirfetch'd is an example of the kind of respect I hope to see from my favorite little guy one day, and I applaud Game Freak for finally giving it. I'll never forget when I first played Pokémon Blue, got a Dux via trade, and realized that he could just mop the floor with the competition thanks to his insanely early access to Swords Dance in Gen 1 at level 23. J-Rose 11 proved just how good he was in that game via solo run last year, validating my feelings all these years later. And seeing his held stick weapon come about in Gen 3 was great too, but it was the reveal of Sirfetch'd that really made this whole thing come full circle for me. He may be too strong for the never used category in competitive Pokemon, and unfortunately not quite strong enough to compete in the category above that, but I think he's content where he is. I don't need Sirfetch'd to be the best Pokemon ever, he already is to me. I just hope that one day we'll see a Pokédex entry showing that the Farfetch'd that I grew up with is now respected the same way that Pokemon like Lapras or Sharpedo are. He's fought long enough. Almost 30 years ago, this duck came to us bearing onions, and hopefully this means that good fortune will continue to smile on him and things will get more convenient for him from here on out. If you're still here, thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay humble.